Howdy my totally always tubular gamers, we're back with you guessed it, another video, and today we're going to be talking about some indie games. You know indie games, right? Those much smaller games usually made by a small dedicated team or even just one person. Forget AAA or even AA. What we're talking about is usually a very tiny team or an individual with an immense amount of passion. While these games might not have the largest scope, budget, or production or anything like that compared to some of these much larger titles, creativity, passion, and quality will always shine through. And the Game Awards always tries to shine a light on the best every single year, and today we're going to be ranking all of them, all of the indie game of the year's worst to best. But of course there is no bad game here, all of these are fantastic. In fact, some of these are some of the best indie games legit ever, and it was actually quite hard to make this entire list, so you already know the drill. We're going to be ranking each indie game of the year winner, seeing what it was up against, sharing some personal thoughts along the way. These games were not selected by me, these were the games that won Game of the Year in the independent category at the Game Awards, and of course I'll share my thoughts on if I agree with the winner or not. These aren't full-blown reviews of these games or anything like that, it's just a general overview. I'm excited to finally talk about some of these indies. I feel like I don't speak enough about indie games, so it's nice to give them the spotlight for a second. So let's get it started in here. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. We got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. Let me know some of your favorite indie games down below. Let's just get right into the list. Alright, you know this is a pretty strong list when the weakest game on it is Kena Bridge of Spirits, which won Best Independent Game in 2021. Now, this game's placement is no slight on the game's quality. I think Kena is pretty good. It's just all these other games I think are a bit better. Something Kena might have though over every single other game on this list though is the graphics. This game looks incredible. It is shocking that this is an indie game and it looks this good. It looks like Pixar animation. The graphics have a certain level of fidelity and quality, and the animation is on a certain level that you would expect to see from like a massive team or a mega corporation. Not this small outfit, not this small team of just dedicated individuals. This game is a real looker, and here we are a few years later and I still think the game just looks amazing. But when it comes to actually playing the game, I think it is pretty good also. It's a mix of like an action adventure game that's more like the 3D Zeldas, but there is actually some Souls-like elements in there. I'm sure plenty of people are going to say cringe, unsubscribe, but this game is no joke. It actually does get pretty difficult. It's like deceptively difficult at times, but so far it's been rather enjoyable. I haven't put as much time into this as I would like, and I really want to play all the way through the game and see everything it has to offer because I am very intrigued here. And who knows, maybe if I had actually finished it, it would be higher up on the list. As it stands though, I think Kena is pretty good. So what was Kena up against? It was up against 12 Minutes, Death's Door, Inscription, and Loop Hero. Now, if you've forgotten about some of these games because they aren't exactly the most well-known games, I mean, we're talking about indie games here. 12 Minutes was the adventure game that had you repeating a 12-minute cycle. It was very narrative focused, an interesting game that I have not played. Perhaps someday I could give it a shot. Maybe I could also give this other game a shot, Death's Door. This is actually the sequel to Titan Souls, which came out many years prior, and I actually am familiar with Titan Souls. That was a good game. It's also an action adventure that isn't crazy different from older Zelda games with a mix of Dark Souls in there. This one seemed pretty cool. Then we have Inscription, which is one that I actually am familiar with. It starts as a roguelike deck builder, but then it starts to do a few other crazy things that I don't really like as much, but as a roguelike deck builder, I think it is pretty good. And then we have Loop Hero, which is this just kind of crazy roguelike that also has some deck builder elements. Haven't played too much of this one, but have only ever heard good things. So when it comes to all of these nominees, do I think that Kena is the best of them? Yeah, I'd say Kena is the best one here, with the runner-up being Inscription. I haven't really messed around with two of them, but my money is on Kena here, and that's what they went with, so maybe they did make the right choice. I don't know, a lot of people actually love Inscription. Inscription has become a little bit of a cult favorite immediately, and I wouldn't be surprised if in like 10-15 years it becomes just an absolute cult classic and people are like, man, what the hell was Kena? I just remember Inscription. Anyway, let's move on to the next game. So here we got the game Inside, which won Best Independent Game in 2016. Now Inside, it's a cool game. It's got a lot of really great elements, and I can see why a lot of people have said that it's one of the best indie games of all time. But, like big, round, fat, juicy butt, I've always had a little bit of a different opinion on Inside. I think it's a good game. I think it's got a really cool vibe and atmosphere, but I've always thought this game was pretty overrated. Call it a hot, spicy, or fiery take, but I've never thought Inside was all that. The controls are decent, the platforming is alright, there's some interesting puzzles here, there is some pretty good set pieces, and the last 20 minutes of the game is rather iconic. However, I've always just felt that the game is good. I don't think it's particularly brilliant or exceptional in several different aspects, and I think a lot of people were really just taken aback by the presentation in the last 20 or so minutes of the game, and that's why the game is as highly regarded as it is. Maybe I just completely missed the point here. This might very well be one of those games that Jonathan here just doesn't get. And you know what? I think that's perfectly okay. I think it is a fine cinematic platformer with a really cool vibe. So what was Inside up against? What were the other nominees? It was up against Firewatch, Hyper Light Drifter, Stardew Valley, and The Witness. Now, I don't know about you, but a few of these games sound a bit better than Inside, in my opinion. I'm just going to address the immediate one you probably heard, Stardew Valley, one of the greatest, if not like the greatest indie game of all time. It was nominated for Best Independent Game of the Year, but it lost to Inside. No. Stardew Valley is the shit. It's like the best farming game ever made. And the game, all these years later, is legit an all-timer. Like, Stardew Valley is just kind of goated. Firewatch, that's a good game. I actually don't think that one's better than Inside. It has an interesting narrative, but it kind of falls apart at the end, and the gameplay is rather basic. It is a very narrative-driven experience, but at least it had a pretty solid presentation. Hyper Light Drifter, I've actually never played this one. I've always wanted to try it though. It's more like an action RPG, kind of like Diablo or older Zelda games. I know a lot of people very much like this one. And then The Witness is a really good one. This is legit one of the best puzzle games ever made. Like, the puzzles aren't messing around in The Witness. I think it's also kind of better than Inside. I'm sure some might disagree with me, but that's the fun in this, is talking about some of the best. When all of these games are so high quality, that's when you know we were eating pretty good that year. 2016, I think it was a pretty good year for indie games, and while Inside might not have been my personal choice, we still had a lot of other great options. So here we got the game Stray, which won Best Independent Game in 2022. I'm sure you remember Stray, the cat game, like the cat game. Sure, there had been cat games before, and there's been plenty of cat games since, but none of them hit like Stray did. This game was like an overnight internet sensation. While there were plenty of people that were excited for it pre-release, post-release, oh, this game was all over. It was making all the headlines, and a lot of people really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed my time with it as well. The game sees our feline protagonist getting separated from its family and just trying to get back to the family, but it uncovers this mysterious underground world, and yeah, there's a lot more to it. The best aspect of Stray is easily the story and world building. It's all actually very well done. Despite the fact that you play as a four-legged creature, I think the story and characters are actually really intriguing, and it's why I wanted to play through Stray. It was for the narrative and all of the excellent world building. I think all of that's really great. On the gameplay side of things, it's pretty basic. It's not much beyond a walking simulator. Like, yeah, there's some platforming, there's some puzzle solving, there's even a few chase sequences, but these are all really basic stuff here. And I would argue that the gameplay is easily the weakest aspect of Stray. The presentation's pretty great, the music's really good in Stray also. There's a lot to like with this game, and the cat is obviously very adorable. The game also pulls at the feels, especially at the beginning, man. I remember tearing up, basically just crying at the beginning because it's so sad. So I think that really says something if it was able to pull that emotion out of me, especially so early. But what were the other nominees? What was Stray up against? It was up against Cult of the Lamb, Neon White, Sifu, and Tunic. And I'll just say, all of these are really great games. You could make an argument for any of these games winning Indie Game of the Year. Cult of the Lamb, that's one of my favorite games of all time. I actually really love Cult of the Lamb. I love the aesthetic, the presentation, the dungeon crawling's fun, and then the Animal Crossing cult-like aspect where you build up your cult. I think it's amazing. Like, it is so good. I've come back to Cult of the Lamb several times. Neon White, that's a really fast-paced, high-octane speedrunning game where there's first-person platforming. That's also a really good one, and it's fun to come back to. Sifu, haven't really played all that much of it, but it is a very cool, balls to the walls, incredibly difficult beat 'em up that has a really awesome gimmick to it where you get older every time you're defeated. And then Tunic, haven't really played a lot of this one either, but it has an incredibly charming, amazing aesthetic to it. Like, I love the vibes, I love how it looks. I really want to play more of this one. It kind of reminds me of old school Zelda, but it also isn't fucking around, and it actually has a bit of bite itself. All of these games actually have a bit of a bite, except for Stray, which is ironic since it's the cat game. But seriously, all of these games have some challenge to them outside of Stray. But besides that, all of these games are straight quality. It is straight fire. 2022 was a very fire year for indie games. Do I personally think Stray was the best game of the nominees? Do I think that it's the best indie game of the year? Personally, no. I think Cult of the Lamb is the best one, but Stray is a good runner-up. Stray was pretty cool, but it just didn't hit for me like Cult of the Lamb did. I just love that game to death. It was so much fun, and I really hope we get a sequel in the future. It was a really great game. 2022, though, it was a good year for indies. So the next game we got here is Sea of Stars, which won Best Independent Game in 2023. Now, Sea of Stars, this is a really cool one. It's a fun throwback to like Chrono Trigger and RPGs of the 90s. It really is a love letter to people who were fans of JRPGs from like 94 all the way up to like 98, 99, once things really got to 3D. And it has a ton of amazing aspects to it. It's still getting updated to this day. They even just added co-op recently to this game. There's a reason so many people like Sea of Stars, especially the JRPG crowd. It's got an epic story, some likable characters, the battle system's pretty cool, the movement's great. Like, this game's got a lot going on, and while I personally haven't put as much time into it as I would like, I've been enjoying what I've been playing very much. It is a very high quality RPG, and if I already didn't know, you could totally convince me that this isn't even an indie game to begin with. But as always, let's take a look at the nominees, what it was up against. 2023 was a real banger of a year, man. It was one of the best years ever, at least when it comes to gaming, and there was some pretty good indie games. There was Cocoon, there was Dave the Diver, Dredge, and Viewfinder. Now, I very much remember the controversy with Dave the Diver being nominated since it technically isn't an indie game, but I will just say that Dave the Diver seems pretty cool. Haven't put a ton of time into that one, but it's got a very unique atmosphere, setting, and gameplay style. Cocoon, that's a pretty cool one. That's a cool puzzle game. If you like puzzle games, you're gonna like Cocoon. Dredge, ooh, this one is really great. It's got a very Lovecraftian, unique art style and vibe to it. It's like a horror fishing game. I really don't know how else to describe it. That was a really good one. Viewfinder, this is one I actually am totally unfamiliar with. It is a puzzle game that, yeah, I've never tried at all. One game I'm surprised that wasn't nominated was Pizza Tower, which came out in January of last year. Pizza Tower, that is a great game, and it has one of the best art styles I've ever seen from an indie game. It's just so fugly, it's perfect. I love Pizza Tower, and I'm a little disappointed and surprised that it wasn't nominated. But of all the games that were nominated here, what do I think is the best one? Is it Sea of Stars? Yeah, probably. I'd say Sea of Stars really is like the best game here. The runner-up would be Dredge for me. Dredge is really cool, and maybe on certain days I would say Dredge is the better game, but today we're going with Sea of Stars. I think they made the right choice, and it was a really great RPG. It was one of the best RPGs of last year, but it was kind of hard to make a lot of headway in the RPG world last year when Baldur's Gate 3 was out and several other very high quality RPGs. 2023, we were eating really good, and when it came to the indie games, I think we were eating pretty good as well. Alright, things are really starting to get interesting here. Now we got Rocket League, which won Best Independent Game in 2015. I know it's kind of hard to even imagine at this point, but when Rocket League came out, it was an indie game. Psyonix was just this tiny little team, and they just happened to put out this absolute banger of a game. And yes, Epic Games would eventually swoop in, and I guess technically now I wouldn't really say it's much of an indie game, but when it released in 2015, absolutely was an indie game, and it really was a sensation. People went nuts for it then, people go nuts for it now. It's just a really fun time. There's a shit ton of depth to it, and it's not hard to see at all why the game has had such a lasting legacy. Like, there's really nothing else like it, and it still is a ton of fun even nowadays. But what were the other nominees here? We got Axiom Verge, Her Story, Ori and the Blind Forest, and then Undertale. There's some pretty good indie games in here. Axiom Verge, really interesting Metroidvania that was a really fun throwback as well. There's even a second game now. When it comes to her story, I really don't got any experience with this one. It's a very narrative-driven experience, and it seems pretty cool. I need to sit down and actually try it. This game even won like Best Narrative in 2015, so I guess it's got a pretty good story. Ori and the Blind Forest, another Metroidvania. This one, very good, also has some really pretty colors and a great presentation, good moveset, all around a really solid game that also has a sequel. And then Undertale, yeah, I think we all know Undertale at this point. Not only is it one of the most iconic indie games of all time, it's just one of the most iconic video games ever, with an amazing story, wonderful characters, phenomenal world building, and the soundtrack is just out of this world. It's one of the best soundtracks of any video game ever. Undertale, it's a masterpiece. Now, of all of these nominees, what do I think is the best indie game? I'm actually going to go with Undertale. I also like Rocket League. Rocket League is fun. I haven't played it in a few years now, but I always had a really great time with it. But man, Undertale is Undertale. It really is just a fantastic video game. Like, there's almost nothing to dislike with Undertale. There's several different ways to play it. There's a ton of replayability. The characters are great. This game's sense of humor and writing is just nothing short of superb. I love how it looks. The music I'm still listening to this day. Like, the game's just mad good. And I would say that it's one of the best, like very best indie games of all time. No questions asked. And I would have no problem recommending it to any type of gamer. And so yeah, I think Undertale was the best game of this year, but Rocket League, it was also really good. 2015 was clearly a good year for indies, and there was a lot of great games to choose from. I can't believe it's been 10 years already, but here we have Shovel Knight, which won Best Independent Game at the first Game Awards show in 2014. While Shovel Knight wasn't the first retro-style throwback to older NES platformers, I think that was Mega Man 9, Shovel Knight's always been one of the more notable ones, and also one of the better ones. Taking inspiration from several classic NES platformers such as DuckTales, Zelda 2, Castlevania 3, Mega Man, and even Mario Bros. 3, it sees you playing as the titular Shovel Knight, and you gotta go save Shield Knight. While the story's nothing special, it's what you would expect from an NES game, the gameplay is absolutely where this game stands up. It's an excellent 2D platformer that's not only a great throwback to older NES games, but it also has a lot of modern sensibilities to create just a really great experience. It feels nostalgic and new at the same time. The level design is really great, Shovel Knight's moveset is really awesome, the controls in general are really great, and the game has gotten tons of DLC and updates throughout the years. There is so much to this game. It really is excellent. It looks great, it plays great, it has a fantastic soundtrack. Shovel Knight, it's one of the fan favorite indie games for a reason. Like, the game really is just awesome. But what were its fellow nominees? What else was Shovel Knight up against? It was up against Broken Age Act 1, Monument Valley, Transistor, and The Vanishing of Ethan Carter. Now, Broken Age, I don't know if it's a bit of a hot take, but I've just never been huge on Broken Age. Like, yeah, it's got some cool stuff to it, the presentation is nice, the story's decent, but the gameplay, yeah, I never thought it was all that. Okay, Monument Valley. Not too familiar with this one, it's also a puzzle game. Looks cool. Transistor, this one is by Supergiant Games, who eventually would go on to make Hades, and yeah, this one was more of like a kind of spiritual successor to Bastion, and I think this is a good one as well. Vanishing of Ethan Carter, very narrative driven experience. The gameplay, there's really not much here, but the story, ooh, the narrative, the world building, where everything goes, it's really great stuff. This was a good year for indies, but if you ask me, I think the best of all of these games is Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight, it really is excellent, and when you think of some of the best 2D platformers from the 2010s, Shovel Knight is absolutely near the top of that list. And I think here we are a decade later, and Shovel Knight is one of the most recognizable indie game characters of them all. Like, when you think of indie games, one of the first characters you probably think of is Shovel Knight, and if it's not, that just means you probably haven't played the games. So go try it. It really is a great game that is absolutely worth your time. And again, there's been so many updates to this game. This game has significantly more content than it did in 2014. It's almost unrecognizable at times from that 2014 game, and it's all been great stuff. It really has been. So here we have the game Celeste, which won Best Indie Game in 2018. I don't think Celeste needs all that much of an introduction. It's probably one of the most well-known indie games of the 2010s, but if you don't remember it, it's that super difficult 2D platformer that sees you playing as this young woman named Madeline who climbs this giant mountain, like actually gargantuan mountain. The story is really deep, there's a lot of thought-provoking themes. and moments to it. There's actually more going on under the hood here than you might expect when it comes to the story, the characters, and the narrative. And the gameplay, it is top notch. This is a fantastic 2D platformer that is incredibly difficult, but it's exceptionally satisfying. This game at times feels like a bit of a spiritual successor to Super Meat Boy, where they drop you in these really difficult short levels and you'll just try over and over and over until you master the movement and the level design. But I feel like Celeste really takes it a step further with more gimmicks, a bigger moveset, tons more levels and challenges, and yeah, it's just a really great game. It's also going to kick your ass. Like, this game legit is one of the hardest games of the 2010s, not even close. But hey, at least you get some really awesome tunes as you're dying over and over and over. That in the game does look pretty nice. Obviously it is a more retro aesthetic, but I like how the game looks. So, what were the other indie games that were nominated that year? Well, in 2018, a few other games were nominated: Dead Cells, Into the Breach, The Messenger, and Return of the Obra Dinn. All very good games. Clearly there was some stiff competition here. 2018 was a good year for indie games. Dead Cells, this is a really excellent roguelike Metroidvania, which actually would win Best Action Game of the Year in 2018 from the Game Awards, so it's a little surprising it didn't win Best Indie Game as well, but really awesome game. Into the Breach is a turn-based strategy game that is a follow-up to FTL, one of the most beloved indie games of all time. I know a lot of people really like Into the Breach. I personally haven't put a ton of time into it, but seems really cool. The Messenger, ooh, this is a good one. This is a retro-inspired action platformer with some Metroidvania elements. It takes a lot of inspiration from the older Ninja Gaiden games, and yeah, it is pretty difficult also. This is a good one. And then Return of the Obra Dinn is a fascinating adventure puzzle game. It takes place in first person and it sees you as this investigator, and man, it has such a cool presentation. There is just a ton of variety and passion put into all of these games. Legit, all of these are very good games. Which do I think is the best though? Yeah, I'm gonna go with Celeste. I really enjoyed my time with Celeste. I love the game's themes and how it actually, made me think about things outside of the game. It actually made me feel something, and then the gameplay is actually really good also. Like Celeste, it's just the complete package. If you haven't tried it and you like 2D platformers and you're okay with the game being relatively challenging, I think this is another must play. And while I think all of the other games are good and even great, they're not Celeste. Alright, so here's the most interesting entry for this entire list, the 2024 Indie Game of the Year. Obviously, as I'm recording this, the 2024 Indie Game of the Year has not been decided yet. So we're going to go over the nominees and then I will select what I believe is going to win. And then of course I've ranked it accordingly in relation to all of the other indie games on this list. So, what's nominated for Best Independent Game of 2024? I'll just say 2024 has been an exceptional year for indie games. Like, this feels like the year of the indie. There has been so many great indie games. Like, I'm gonna have a video talking about just indie games. That's how many great, amazing indie games there have been this year. But what was nominated? Animal Well, Balatro, Lorelei and the Laser Eyes, Neva, and then UFO 50. I think a case could be made for each one of these games winning Indie Game of the Year, and I think any of these games realistically could actually win Indie Game of the Year. Animal Well, this is one of the best Metroidvanias I've ever played. It's just exceptional. Everything about the game is incredible. Balatro, oh Balatro, how many hours have you taken from my life this year? While I really exclusively play the game on the Steam Deck, so I don't have a lot of footage of it, this game has taken quite a bit of my life this year. It is one of the best roguelikes ever. It's like the best poker game ever made. The game's incredible. Lorelei and the Laser Eyes, I really don't have much experience with this one. I've always wanted to get into it. It seems much more like a puzzle game, and I just need to sit down and give it some time. Neva, really emotional, engaging experience that comes from the studio that made Gris, which was also a very emotional game as well. And then UFO 50, a compilation of 50 games. I have not tried this, but I've heard nothing but great things about it. I'm sure plenty of people down below are going to say go try UFO 50. I want to try it, damn it. But out of all the games I've talked about, out of all the amazing indie games in 2024, what do I think is going to win the Best Independent Game award from the Game Awards? I think it's going to be Balatro. Balatro is nominated for Overall Game of the Year. So I would be shocked if it's any game outside of Balatro, and you know what? It's well deserved. The game is mad good. If it's not going to be our favorite card game, then I think it would be Animal Well. That would be my runner-up. I think Animal Well is a great game. I would argue Animal Well is actually better than Balatro, but I think Balatro is going to win Indie Game of the Year, and you know what? It's well deserved. The game is just mad fucking good. Like, it's one of the most addicting games I've ever played, and I was seeing it in my dreams. I'm listening to the music pretty regularly still. Like, the game's just crazy good, and I legit was afraid to get the game because I knew I'd get super into it, and once I finally got it, yeah, I absolutely got super into it, and it's just as good as you've heard it is. Like, there's a reason it's nominated for overall Game of the Year. I obviously have no concrete facts or logistics behind this, but I think the only people questioning why it's nominated for Game of the Year are the people that haven't played it. Once you play it, you'll understand. Once you put a few hours into it, oh, you'll understand why so many people love it. And I feel like we could be here all day explaining why the game is as good as it is, but I got other games to talk about, so let's just move on. But before we do, I will say 2024, it really was a killer year for indies. Like, if you want to play some great indie games, you got plenty to choose from this year. So here we have another favorite of mine. We have Cuphead, which won Best Independent Game in 2017. Now Cuphead, oh, I love this game. I was really excited for it before it came out, and since its release, I've played through the game several times. I've actually replayed it even. Like, it's just mad good. I love just about everything about Cuphead. Obviously, the presentation is phenomenal. There really is almost no other game that looks like it. Obviously, there's been a few imitators since its release, but I just love how this game looks so much. The aesthetic, the vibe, the graphics, the animation, it's all so well done. The music is amazing, and then the gameplay, oh, it's just top notch. This is one of the best run and gun shooters ever. Legit ever. It's just so well done. It's mostly boss fights. It's a boss rush kind of game, and all of the bosses are so well done. Some of the best bosses of any video game. Like, if you're looking for a game with just really great boss fights, look no further than Cuphead. It doesn't get much better than Cuphead when it comes to boss fights. Everything about the game is just exceptionally well done. And then it's also hard as balls. Like, it is ridiculously difficult. It's easily one of the hardest games I've ever beaten. But man, it is so worth it. It is so satisfying. The game is just such a fun time. And then it can also be played cooperatively. Like, this game's really great. But what was its competition? Well, it was up against Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, Night in the Woods, Pyre, and What Remains of Edith Finch. Now, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, that was actually a very good game, and it's crazy that it was an indie game. Like, it just had a phenomenal presentation, phenomenal sound design, and then it also had a really great story, and the character of Senua was really great also. The gameplay, yeah, it was a little basic, but I think this was a really great game. Night in the Woods, this is an adventure game that I personally don't have all that much experience with, but I really do like the art style, I will say that at least. Pyre, there's really not much else like Pyre. This is the third game by Supergiant Games. This is after Transistor, but before Hades, and it's a really cool sports game. Like, this one is very unique, and all these years later, it feels like there's really just almost nothing else like it out on the market. And then What Remains of Edith Finch, this is a narrative-driven experience. It is very much focused on the story, characters, world building, and much less on the gameplay. And yeah, it does have a good story. But its storytelling goes one step further, and it's actually some of the best non-linear storytelling in any video game. Like, the story can be told in a number of different ways, and it's all really great stuff. This game is used as an example for storytelling in video games. I can tell you that from personal experience. The storytelling is very good in this game. Clearly 2017 was a good year for indies. There's some really great games here, but what do I believe is the best of them? It's not even close. I'm gonna go with Cuphead. There's some good ones here. Hellblade is good, What Remains of Edith Finch is great, Pyre's really great, but Cuphead is Cuphead, man. This game is just phenomenal. Despite being stupidly difficult, I just love everything about this game, and I've come back to it every few years, and it's always a great time. Cuphead, it's just so good. It really is just so much fun. It's rewarding, it's satisfying, it's engaging, it's challenging, and most importantly, it'll keep you interested from start to finish. Just a great game all around. Then we got Disco Elysium, which won Best Independent Game of 2019, and oh, what is there left to say about this game? This game is nothing short of brilliant. Like, it is an incredible video game through and through. This game, it's actually an all-timer. It's one of the best CRPGs ever, really only being topped by Baldur's Gate 3, and it has some of the best writing in not only a video game, but media as a whole. Like, the writing is truly exceptional in Disco Elysium. The presentation's great, the soundtrack is good, the characters are likable, there's so many role-playing elements, your build can be completely different. There might not be any combat, but the amount of different ways every single scenario can play out, it's just incredible. It's crazy just how many different ways literally every single situation can go down, and the way that your Harry is built out, it might be really different from how mine was on either playthrough. This is one of those games that you're going to want to replay over and over. Like, it just has so many good aspects to it, and it really is one of the best games ever. No hyperbole. But there were some other independent games that came out this year, and so there were some other indie games it was up against. It was up against Baba Is You, Katana Zero, Outer Wilds, and Untitled Goose Game. Now, Baba Is You is a game that I'm very familiar with, but I have not tried it. It is a really serious puzzle game, and yeah, it seems like it's the kind of puzzle game that's going to have you scratching your head a lot. Katana Zero is a very fast-paced hack-and-slash 2D platformer that is very comparable to Hotline Miami, where everything dies very quickly and the game is rather challenging. Outer Wilds, a lot of people really love everything about Outer Wilds. To be honest, I've only played like 30 minutes of it, and clearly I need to play a lot more of it to truly understand what this game is about, and I will just leave it at that. Then we have the Untitled Goose Game, which is just a funny game where you play as a silly goose fucking around with people, and apparently it was so good it won Game of the Year at the DICE Awards that year. And that is no joke, it really did. I ranked all of the DICE Game of the Year award winners, and Untitled Goose Game was on there. Now, out of all of these games, you know what, it's pretty obvious. Disco Elysium is like the best one here. I love Disco Elysium. I think they chose the right game here. It truly is phenomenal. I know some people will say the Outer Wilds, but I just don't have enough experience with that one to truly say. But clearly, 2019, it was a good year for indies. There was some really high quality games here, and I think just about everybody can like something here. I guess unless you were looking for a racing game, then it's going to be sad face. But that's not what today's video is about. It's about the best indies in disco. It's absolutely up there. But then we got the big one, the big motherfucker of them all. We have Hades, which won Best Indie Game in 2020. Now Hades, this game really is a GOAT. It is one of the very best indie games ever made, no hyperbole. Not just indie games, one of the best games ever made. 2020 obviously had tons of bad things going on, but when it came to video games that were released that year, oh, it was one of the best. There were so many, and Hades was one of the very best games all year. It comes as zero surprise that this game won Game of the Year in 2020. It's a fantastic roguelike with some excellent combat, a great story and set of characters. The world building is really great. The combat is just exceptional. Like, this game really is the complete package. It is so unbelievably good. We could be here all day singing its praises. I don't love roguelikes. There hasn't been a ton I've even played, but I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, Hades is the best one of them all. There were some other games that came out in 2020 that were indie games that were pretty good, so we'll talk about them, but I'll just immediately say they aren't Hades. There was Carry On, Fall Guys, Spelunky 2, and Spiritfarer. All of these are actually very good games. Carry On was that reverse horror game where you're the monster and you destroy everything, and this is a good game. I think this game is actually pretty underrated, and I feel like this game's actually been a bit forgotten a few years later. And speaking of forgotten, we have Fall Guys. Man, this game was the shit in 2020. A lot of people really love Fall Guys. Even in 2021 it was very popular, but unfortunately nowadays it doesn't seem to be all that, which is a real shame. I thought this game was always a ton of fun. Spelunky 2, a very difficult 2D platformer that I have yet to try because I've just heard so many things about how this game's going to wipe the floor with me, and I'm a little nervous, to be honest, but I know it is very well regarded. And then Spiritfarer is a really interesting management simulation kind of game that has some really great vibes to it. But none of these are Hades. Hades is just unstoppable. It really is just one of those all-timers that everybody must try. It is just one of those experiences that every human should try out. Even if you don't like this style of game, or you don't like the fact that you lose everything when you die, or that a run can be upwards of 45 minutes to an hour, it doesn't matter. You're gonna like the game. It's just one of those games that really excels in nearly every single aspect, and it's games like Hades that remind me why I like video games as much as I do. All of these games might not be big budget AAA games, but what you can see with them is passion, creativity, imagination, and most importantly, quality. All of these indie games I've talked about today are serious quality, and none of them are from traditional game studios, but it doesn't matter. They're mad good. Indie games are where the heart and soul of gaming still is. I know a lot of people have said it's long gone in the AAA scene. Trust me, play indie games. Indie games are just amazing. Sure, they might not have the production or the graphics of the fancy AAA, but they usually got the story or the gameplay to back it up, and that's what matters at the end of the day. And of course having fun, which all of these games are. And speaking of, that's going to be our code word today. If you made it to this part of the video, comment fun, and let me know what your favorite indie game of the last 10 years has been. I think this year has been a great year for indie games, and hopefully I get to talk about indies some more. But with that, I hope everybody has a fantastic day. Stay safe, y'all. Bye-bye now.